Hi, my name's Tappan Vickery, and I'm the Senior Director of Programming and Strategy with Headcount.
Hi, my name is Adam Met. I'm the bass player in the band AJR, and I also run an organization called Planet Reimagined, and I teach climate campaigning at Columbia University. Okay, let's dive into this. Climate and voting, this is such an important year. I have so many questions for you, but we're going to make this a fun and interesting discussion about the environment and why this is such an important year, not just in November, but as soon as today and even the last few months and the next few months, why they're all vital decisions that people across the country are making around climate and so many other issues. So I'm just curious, just to kick off, why do you feel that this year is maybe one of the most important elections of our lifetime?
Well, a lot of people would say that democracy is on the line, and that's not what we're here to talk about necessarily, but I have to say that is why I believe this is one of the most important elections of our lifetime. When it comes to climate and environmental justice, I do know that a lot of young voters, which is Headcount's target, are really experience mental health issues because of climate anxiety. And it's a real tracked issue across studies. And I find that when we're talking to folks about reasons why they want to vote and why they care about voting, if you can tie the environment in, a lot of times people see a reason. And we believe that if you care about it, the most important thing you can do is vote about it. And at the local and primary election level, it's also really important to vote in your spring primaries, in your fall primaries, because a lot of progressive or regressive environmental policy is happening in the state houses. And those are the elections that are not happening necessarily on November 5th, but they're getting decided earlier throughout the cycle who's going to be on the ballot. I just throw in a fun stat that less than a quarter of registered voters turn out for presidential primary elections, even fewer for state primary elections, which means that, and that's not eligible voters, that's registered voters. And that means that a very select few are deciding who's making decisions at the highest level in your community. And I think it's important that we start paying attention to all elections all through the year.
I couldn't agree more. And one of the things that has me the most excited is that I think there are about 8 million new young people that will be able to vote for the first time this year. At headcount, do you see people's first elections making them more likely to actually come out and vote?
Yeah, that's actually statistically proven. It's fascinating. If you can get someone to vote for the first time, they're most likely going to be a voter for the rest of their life. Now, if I can get them to vote for the first time in a state or local election, I know I've got them forever. But it's really exciting. And it's not just the people that we register, it's also people that come out and volunteer with us. They become sort of democracy advocates in their communities, which is really exciting because they're young, they're college students, they're in the beginning of what we call the funnel, the process, and they're finding their voice, and then they're the person that their friends go to when they're like, what does this mean? What is a ballot initiative? How do I read this? And they become we have over 60,000 and they become our ambassadors. It's really exciting.
So I want to talk about all of these different things. I want to talk about obviously the presidential election. That's the one that's getting the most media attention. But at the state level and the local level, there are so many elections happening. And those are usually the decision makers for things that will affect your day-to-day lives. Now, because we're focusing on climate, I want to start with the premise that climate is everything. You're not just talking about the temperature, right? Climate is an immigration issue. Climate is a public health issue. Climate is a transportation issue. Climate is a jobs issue. Climate really is everything. So as you're making a decision about what candidate you're going to vote for, my kind of go-to is as you're doing your research, I would not spend more than 15 or 20 minutes looking at a candidate. And if you can't find their position on climate, because it affects so many other things, you can't find and really understand what their position is on climate in 15 or 20 minutes, then they're probably not a climate candidate. But 15 or 20 minutes is not that much time to dedicate. So if you really feel like climate is an issue for you, and like I said, it really hits everything, I would spend that time to figure out who those climate candidates are on your ballot. Now, to kind of take a little bit of a step back, in looking at when your elections are, most people that you go up to, they don't know when their primary elections are. Sure, they know that the general election is in November, but they don't know when these primaries are. Is this something that Headcount can help with?
Absolutely. Headcount runs a extensive state-by-state voter hub at headcount.org/state, and you can pick your state. And if you sign up to get information from us, we'll do geo-targeted messaging to let you know when your state, local, and federal elections are and when your primaries are. So we are very conscious about not wanting to spam people. I do really encourage people to sign up for text because I know people don't actually read their emails. I might be guilty of that a little bit. And I promise I will not text you ad nauseum. But you can sign up on our website to receive that geo-targeted information, or you can just simply go to headcount.org to receive the information for your upcoming elections.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, it's kind of a bit of a story. So over the last year and a half, I've done a lot of work in Congress and at the local level and at the state level around energy permitting. So one of the most complicated things around climate is how we're going to site new solar panels, new windmills, new geothermal. And it's a really complicated issue, but we did a massive study at Planet Reimagined at my organization to look at oil and gas land in this country and figure out new ways to site renewables on top of previously disturbed land. So that basically means any of the pristine land that we have in the West that's federal land, we would be able to save that land, keep it public, and take these new forms of energy and put them on top of previously disturbed oil and gas land. It helps those companies transition their business in addition to preserving land. And it also cuts down the amount of time in order to permit these new kinds of energy. Now, when I did this, I didn't just go and speak to Democrats in DC. I spoke to an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. So this is to say that climate is not just an issue for the left. At COP this year, which is the Conference of the Parties, it's a big climate conference that happens every single year. You might have heard of the Paris Climate Agreement. That's where that was agreed. At COP this year, the largest delegation from Congress was a Republican delegation. Republicans are starting to really wrap their minds around climate, especially when it comes to energy security and especially when it comes to jobs. They really care about this transition and the people in their districts. So if you're a climate voter and you want to really focus on climate as your issue, looking at everyone's policies across the board to help you figure out who to vote for. There are many Democrats in Congress and at the local level who have voted against really, really great climate policies. And there are Republicans who have voted for really great climate policies. So I don't want anyone who's watching to think of this as a left issue versus a right issue. This is a take the 15, 20 minutes to figure out who's running in your election and figure out who the right person is for you for climate.
Yeah, I would add on to that. Well, I won't talk about policy because Headcount doesn't. I will say that if you look at the candidates' websites, they're designed by marketers. And if you want to look at nonpartisan voting guides, I highly recommend it. There are many in the community. We have some that don't do endorsements on our website and it's part of the same voter hub. And climate is one of the issues that is tracked. And so I do think like looking at vote history is a really, whether it's climate or anything else, looking at vote history and not just position points is a really important way to get to know your candidates.
That is a great point. And I've seen many of these websites where candidates get grades and they're also listed, did you vote for the Inflation Reduction Act?
Yeah.
Did you vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill? Did you vote for the CHIPS Act? All of these are federal pieces of legislation that have done huge amounts for the US being the leader really on climate policy. So you can see everyone's record. I
Right.
couldn't agree more.
I'd love to dig in a little bit, though, on the permitting part, because I do think it's really interesting when you talk about local elections. Almost always, you have a county or municipal commission who is then going to appoint a board who is going to move something through the permitting process. So if you have federal or state legislation that says like, hey, we want X amount of sustainable energy by X date, But then you have these people who are at this municipal and county levels, they're really far away from those key decision makers, and they're really far away from the voters. If you really want to pay attention, whether, and as you said, renewable energy is a part of climate, but also affordable housing, public transit, clean water, any sort of like growth issues, like you really have to look at that municipal and county level, and then also look at who's getting appointed to a committee. And if you want to go really big, be on a committee. They love
Yeah.
having young people on a committee. I was on a committee and I loved it. It was great for stormwater. And I think like, just making sure that you're not so far away from the stakeholders in your community who are permitting is so important. And unfortunately, they're not all elected officials. Most of them are appointed.
I love this. How can people find out more information about committees in their community and how they can volunteer and participate?
Yeah, so that is actually a harder question because it is hard to put on one website. But what you can do is go to your county or municipal websites and just type in the topic that you're interested in. Something is going to pop up, whether it's recycling, sustainability, bike lanes, renewable energy, whatever it is. Type it in the search bar, and you're going to find out who's in charge of that in your community. There are often open comment periods whenever new things are happening. They invite the public into committee meetings. And so coming to a committee meeting, seeing what it's about, it could be tedious and awful. I actually would not recommend a planning committee meeting unless you're really into it. But some of the other ones are a good entrance point, Parks and Rec, arts and culture. And I think that it's just like, it's so important to know that it's democracy and participation does not just stop at the voting booth, although that is where you should definitely start, but it is a part of something that can be much larger.
So I love this approach because so many people are still talking about carbon footprints, and I think this is such a mistake. So this might not be a popular opinion. However, I will tell you a quick story. BP, the oil company that was called British Petroleum, now they changed their name to Beyond Petroleum, so they sound more climate friendly. They were the ones who coined the term carbon footprint in order to put the responsibility of climate action on individuals. The CEO of Chevron just did an interview saying that people, individuals, are not doing enough to combat the climate crisis. And I have absolutely heard enough about people switching to, reusable straws or making a difference around recycling or making changes in their individual lives. That is not the thing that's going to move us forward in tackling the climate crisis. It's civil action and it's political action. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. Now, of course, it's really big companies that are the largest contributors to emissions. But the way that they are going to change their policies is with the government stepping up and making these policy changes like the Inflation Reduction Act. And the only way that we're going to get these large-scale policy changes is if we vote the right people into office. Now, when I say voting the right people into office, yes, of course, talk about the president, we can talk about Congress. One of the most important things that I learned about when doing my energy policy work in states like New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, pretty much everywhere across the West, oil and gas funds education. Oil and gas funds hospitals. Oil and gas funds communities because it was set up that way. They tied harming the environment to increased social services. Now, part of the work that I do is to change that structure, to allow new kinds of energy to help fund schools and help fund hospitals, because obviously those are incredibly important systems. Now, when you're voting for things like climate, you're also helping to vote for better school systems, better funding for school systems, better funding for hospitals. And one of the key things that I want to get into here is because we've talked about a whole bunch of different areas of climate, but you mentioned it very briefly, environmental justice. And that is something that is incredibly important because we see so many communities around the US decimated, especially by companies. And it's not just the pollution, it's the way companies treat these communities, from the work policies to the zoning. how is environmental justice something that we can address when we're voting this year?
Oh,
It's a
wow.
big question.
That's a huge question. So I think that I'm going to also flag natural disasters as a place where we see environmental justice. I think I read that over the past 10 years, something like 85% of the major metros in the United States have experienced a major natural disaster, which has led to serious environmental concerns in communities,
Yeah.
which is remarkable. But I think that when you talk about environmental justice, you're talking about a socioeconomic system that is completely entrenched in how we take care of our earth and how we take care of each other and our economy. And it's something that takes many, many years to get out of, to unlearn, as you said, the patterns of behavior, the patterns of economy, the patterns of local ecosystems and economies that can then create a more sustainable world and address real injustice that has harmed many communities. And those are often those who are disenfranchised at the ballot box. And we have to like talk about that and the fact that if you want to truly have true enfranchisement and all voters have a voice, you have to look at the fact that sometimes they're in the places where it's hardest for them to get to the polls, where there are not resources and where we're not taking care of people to be participants in democracy. So I would say that increasing access to democracy, to bring it back to the beginning of this conversation, increasing access to democracy to enfranchise people who have experienced environmental injustices is the first and biggest step that we must take to then relearn our systems and grow into another phase.
And honestly, it's a virtuous cycle, right? As you participate in democracy, you're going to keep increasing access to democracy. So I think probably from both of us, the biggest call to action is to vote. And we gave a huge number of resources, some instructions of how to figure out the policies that you care about, how to do your research, how to go sign up and get alerts from Headcount about when your primaries are, when the general is. There's so many simple things you can do, but I want to kind of wrap this up with the idea of your own local community, because as much as somebody like myself can post on Instagram, even Taylor Swift, had the largest number of voters registered from her posting on her Instagram story. That's fantastic. But at the same time, a lot of research has been done that proves you're much more likely to listen to the people who you have strong ties with, your family, your friends, the people in school and your job and your community. So I think in addition to actually going to vote yourself, one of the most important things you can do is share this information and share the specific issues that are going on in your community with those other people, because they are much more likely to go out and vote if you do it together.
Here, here. Thanks so much, Adam. This was great.
Thank you.